Mr. President, I don't know where to begin. I want to talk a little about the tax reform proposal, but start by responding to my colleague from Maryland, and he is a colleague and a friend, and say he must be talking about a different tax reform proposal than we're talking about, because so much of what he said, frankly, is not consistent with the legislation that I've seen the House proposing, and certainly not consistent with the legislation we're talking about over here in the Senate. Let me start with his claim that there's a $1.5 trillion tax cut for big corporations. That's simply not true. And, you can look at the House proposal because it's now out. You can see the fact that it does have tax relief, and it has tax relief targeted at middle-class families. He's right about the fact that it has a lower rate for our multinational businesses, but he also knows that our current system is absolutely broken, and what's occurring is precisely what he's suggesting might occur if we were to change the code, which is companies and jobs and investment are going overseas. Talked about the fact that we haven't had hearings. Just since I got elected here in 2010, we've had 70 hearings in the committee I serve on, which is the Finance Committee. I would encourage people to look at what we did 2 years ago. We set up 5 bipartisan task forces on tax reform. I co-chaired one of them. It was actually on the very topic my colleague was talking about. I would encourage him to look at the working group paper on international tax reform and the need for us to go to a low rate, 20%, to be competitive, to get just below the average of the other industrialized countries, and then to have the opportunity to go to a new type of tax system that enables us to bring back the money that is locked out overseas. Unbelievably, there's $2.5 to $3 trillion of earnings that are overseas. Much of that could be brought back, and that's what this tax proposal does. Significantly, that report, you will see, was co-authored by 2 members of this body, 1 Republican and 1 Democrat, because all these task forces, these working groups, were bipartisan. My colleague in that effort was a senator from New York by the name of Chuck Schumer, who now happens to be the Democratic leader. So I think there's a consensus, at least in the real world, about the fact that our current tax code is hopelessly broken and we have to fix it. And if you're against helping our companies to stay American companies, that must mean that you believe that they ought to become foreign companies, which is exactly what's happening. And it is, to me, an outrage that the United States Congress is allowing this to happen. Ernst & Young, which is a public accounting firm, recently came out with a study showing that 4,700 companies that have become foreign companies over the past 13 years would be still American companies if we were to go to the kind of tax reform proposal that we are proposing. In other words, if you had this 20% rate I talked about in this competitive international system, you would have 4,700 more American companies here, providing jobs, making investments, contributing to their communities. And it does matter that a company is headquartered here versus headquartered overseas. We've done analysis of this. We've done an investigation of this. We have determined that when companies leave, they don't just change their headquarters. They take investment and jobs with them. I would refer you to the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations work on this. Again, bipartisan work about the fact that we have to fix this broken tax code. The Congressional Budget Office, which is the nonpartisan group up here on Capitol Hill that gives us advice on the impact of tax reform, on the economy, on deficits, on revenues. They have a report that says that if you do lower the business tax rate to make these companies competitive, again, the alternative is going overseas, that the benefit of that goes to shareholders, goes to workers. They say, in their analysis, 70% of the benefit goes to higher wages, more benefits for workers. Now think about it. That makes sense. If a company is not competitive, they can't pay the kind of wages we want them to pay. We want to get wages up. They can't pay the kind of benefits we want them to pay. We want to get benefits up. So I would hope that, although we can have a spirited debate about aspects of this legislation, we should stick to the facts. We should not attempt to make this yet another partisan issue here in this town, where we're attacking something not so much on the merits, but because the other side thought about it. I will tell you, when you look back historically, it isn't just the working group that Senator Schumer and I co-chaired on this international front, where we have to get this rate down, we have to become competitive, we have to save our jobs here. But look at another bipartisan effort that's talked about a lot, and it's not agreed to by all Democrats or all Republicans, but it's called the Simpson-Bowles proposal. This was several years ago, and they looked at the tax policy and deficit issues, and Simpson-Bowles, totally bipartisan, supported by a bipartisan group of United States senators at the time who were on that commission. They said we ought to go to this lower rate and territorial system. This is not a partisan issue, or at least it hasn't been until now. Let's not make it one. Yes, it's true. There is tax relief in this proposal. The proposal that the House has proposed and the proposal that the Senate is likely to propose later this week does have tax relief. And we believe that tax relief is appropriate because we do believe that we've got to give middle-class families in my home state of Ohio and around the country a little break right now. Why? Because they are seeing their expenses go up, especially health care, but also other expenses. And I say especially health care because that's the single largest increase in expenses is in the health care area, deductibles, co-pays, premiums, but also in food and housing, other costs, tuition if you're trying to send your kids to school, it's skyrocketed, and yet wages are flat, meaning people are facing this middle-class squeeze. And we ever hear a lot of discussion on both sides of the aisle about the fact that we want to help the middle class. Well, one way to help is to help the family budget, isn't it? Is to say, let's get a little relief into these families so that they can be able to make ends meet and not just live paycheck to paycheck. And by the way, it'll help the economy. It'll help just to get more money into the economy, to buy that car, to be able to buy that appliance, help move the economy forward. But it's part of this reform bill. Yes, it is. And we're proud of that. We also, again, provide some of that tax relief on the business side to help small businesses. These are the so-called pass-through companies. About 90% of the businesses in America don't pay their taxes as companies. They're not corporations in that sense. They pay their taxes through their individual tax return. They're called pass-through companies. Some call them LLCs or subchapter S or sole proprietors or partnerships. But these are the companies that tend to be smaller companies. They tend to be family-owned. They need a little help, too. So, yeah, the proposal does provide some significant relief for those small businesses. And that, in the House proposal and the Senate proposal, it's hundreds of billions of dollars out of that $1.5 trillion tax relief. We think that's appropriate. And then finally, again, on the business side, it's to help make these companies competitive, to get that rate down so that they can attract investment into America rather than having that investment in jobs going out of America, which is what's happening now. 4,700 companies would be American companies today if we had this kind of tax reform proposal in place over the last 13 years, but we didn't. And we should learn from that. And it's Congress's responsibility to act to keep that from happening in the future. So that's what this tax reform is about. It's about three things. It is about a middle-class tax cut, enabling people to keep more of their hard-earned money. We think that's appropriate in these times. It is about helping to make our companies more competitive because we want more jobs and we want higher wages. Part of doing the middle-class squeeze is provide a little help for the family budget with tax relief. Part of it is to get wages up. And when people look at this tax reform proposal, right, left, or center, they're going to say the same thing. Yeah, this is going to incentivize some more investment. Now, some think more, some think less. But that investment in a tight labor market like we've got right now is going to result in more competition for those workers and therefore pushing wages up. That's what we want. That's what this is about. It's exciting. And then third is to level that playing field internationally. So American companies won't be going overseas. That's the whole point. We're not doing this tax reform proposal to encourage companies to go overseas. We're doing this tax reform proposal to incentivize them to stay in America and to attract more foreign investment here in this country so that an American company can pay that premium for a foreign subsidiary rather than the other way around now, where American companies are not just inverting. You've heard this word probably, inversions, going overseas and buying a foreign company. They're actually being taken over by foreign companies. That's the reality. We can't let it continue. We have to stand up and be counted. Stand up for the middle class. Stand up for our workers who are now competing with one hand tied behind their back. Whether it's a big auto company in my home state of Ohio, I toured 5 of these auto factories over the last couple weeks, talked to them about the tax reform proposal, how it would work. They gave me their input. It's going to help. And by the way, it's going to help whether you're a U.S. company or a foreign company. If you're a foreign automaker here in America, or you have other foreign investment, a lower rate and immediate expensing, in other words, being able to write off your investments as you make them in plant and equipment, that's all good for you too. So it will have both the desired effect of helping American companies be competitive, but also if you have foreign direct investment in your state and your community, they should be encouraged to put more money in America rather than somewhere else. If you're a Japanese automaker and you're looking around the world and saying, do I put that next investment in China? Do I put it in Tokyo? Do I put it in Europe, in Germany? Or do I put it in America? They'll like this proposal because they'll want to invest and be part of this too. That's going to help us give this economy a needed shot in the arm. Now, there's been a lot of talk, and I heard it again today on the floor, that, gosh, this is going to be bad for the deficit. Well, I think there'll be about $44 trillion of new revenue coming in, estimated over the next 10 years. Yes, out of that amount of money, we are suggesting a $1.5 trillion tax cut relative to the budget we have to use. Now, what does that mean? Well, actually, about a third of that, about $500 billion of that, is simply saying that, you know what, the Budget Office says that the existing tax policy that's in place is only temporary. Some of it's only temporary. These are the so-called extenders. We know that's unlikely because we've always made these permanent, pretty much, including a big one called bonus depreciation, which is most of that. So we think right away the way it's scored is not fair. So you get down to about $1 trillion in tax relief. That's $1 trillion over 10 years, again with $44 trillion coming in. What does that mean? Well, it means that you have to have a little more economic growth than is projected in order to have not a deficit, but actually paying down the deficit through more revenue coming in. I think that will happen. Why do I say that? Well, because the projections we have to use are very conservative. The Congressional Budget Office is what we are using, and we are obliged to do that, which is fine. It's a nonpartisan group. They are saying that economic growth over the next 10 years will average about 1.9% of growth. Now, the average over the past 30 years is about 2.5%. So they're saying our economy is not going to grow as fast as it has in the last 30 years. We'll see. In the last 2 quarters, the economy grew at 3% and 3.1%. So they don't seem to be on track with where the economy is going right now. More importantly to me, if you look at these proposals we're talking about, these are pro-growth proposals, whether it's the help with regard to the business rate, which gets it below the rate of other industrialized countries rather than the highest rate in the entire industrialized world, which is where we are now. We have the highest rate in the industrialized world. We're getting it below the average. That will increase investment in economic activity and jobs and therefore revenue. Whether it's the immediate expensing, again, where you can write down your investments right away, that's going to increase investment in jobs. According to all the economists who look at that, that's true. They may differ on how much. If you look at the international side, where we're going to bring back some of that $2.5 to $3 trillion that's stuck overseas, that's certainly going to be invested here in this country and help with regard to economic growth. So there are a number of provisions. I talked about the small business provisions earlier. They're going to help small businesses to be able to innovate, to be entrepreneurial, which is what we need more of, more new starts. That's going to help. So all that together is going to help with economic growth. How much? Well, let's say instead of the 1.9% conservative estimate that they have made for the next 10 years, let's say it grows 0.4% more, 0.4% more than projected. I would attribute at least that much just to this tax reform proposal, because of what we just talked about. But if you believe it's going to grow at 0.4% more than projected, in other words, instead of 1.9%, 2.3%, 2.3% growth will be below the average over the last 30 years, then you actually will see the deficit start to come down because of this tax reform proposal. Because the revenue will be there, not just to make it revenue neutral, but beyond that, will actually pay down the deficit. We haven't done that in a while. But back in 1990, 97, 98, 99, 2000. We went through this before. We began to reduce the deficit annually. Do you know how it happened? Well, constraining some spending helped, and that's obviously part of our challenge here in the Congress. How do we get our hands around the spending? But second is growing the economy, and in that case, the capital gains rate of taxation was reduced. And suddenly, in the late 1990s, about $100 billion of revenue nobody expected showed up in the coffers. That's how we got to a so-called balanced budget a few years early, because tax revenues were greater than expected. I believe this will happen again. I believe that when you look at this proposal, it is conservative in the sense that it says, yes, let's provide needed middle-class tax relief. Let's also do these things to grow the economy. And let's assume that because of all this, we're going to be able to improve the economic performance that's projected. It's a pretty disappointing projection. Let's face it, 1.9% growth isn't great for any of us. It isn't great to deal with the issues of poverty. It isn't great to deal with the issues of entrepreneurship and innovation. It isn't going to help us to be able to afford the entitlements that are growing. We need better growth than that. We want more growth than that. And I think tax relief is the single most important thing we can do right now. Yes, we should have more regulatory relief. Yes, we should do better in terms of getting the costs of health care under control. People are concerned about their costs rising so fast, and we haven't been able to grapple with that issue. Yes, we should do more on worker training. We have a skills gap in this country. We have jobs that are available, and yet we don't have the skilled workforce to take those jobs. Yes, we can do more in terms of helping grow the economy through education, other things. But the one policy area that is crying out for reform is our tax system. It is antiquated. It is out of date. It is driving jobs overseas. It makes no sense. It can be simplified, and this simplifies the tax code. It can be made more fair, and this makes it more fair by helping the middle class more. It can encourage economic growth, and it does so through the small business relief and the relief for our multinational companies. It can help bring back the trillions of dollars that are stuck overseas, and that's what this does. That's the whole idea here. So I'm excited about this opportunity. The House of Representatives is working on their legislation now in committee. Next week, that'll shift to the Senate and the Senate Committee on Finance. We'll have the opportunity for an open process. As I noted, we've already had 70 hearings in the Finance Committee, just over the past 7 years since I've been in this chamber. We've had working groups, including the bipartisan one I mentioned earlier, the 5 bipartisan working groups of that committee. We'll have the opportunity at our hearing next week to have an open process. Anybody can offer an amendment. Open discussion. And we'll have an interesting debate. It'll be spirited, as we saw here today. We've got some differences of opinion, but let's stick to the facts. Let's not make this partisan. Let's stick to the merits. Let's try to help the American people and our economy. And then it'll come to the floor of the United States Senate, and the same thing will happen, an open process. Every desk you see in here represents a senator who will have the opportunity, should he or she wish to offer an amendment, to have a debate, to discuss the issue. Yeah, it'll be spirited at times, but again, I hope it will lead us to a result that actually helps to do the things we were elected to do, to give our constituents, the people we represent, the chance to have a better life, to give middle-class families a little relief as they're facing this middle-class squeeze, to help grow this economy. Yeah, from the middle out, from the bottom up, from everywhere, to be able to give us the ability to say once again that America is that shining example, that beacon of hope and opportunity for the rest of the world. That's what this is about. And let's not blow this opportunity. Let's get it done. Let's get to the President, to his desk for a signature before the end of this year. And let's make good on the commitments we've made to our constituents to help create a better economy and a better future. I yield back.